welcome back to the channel guys. I am the Drunken Goth and today we are back in with the GT4 and today we're going to focus on the suspension, getting that rear suspension all stripped down, getting those wishbones off, getting those shock absorbers off and getting everything ready to get them bushes out, get everything powder coated, ready for the build up. So rowing in with the suspension, first thing we're going to do is get this roll bar off. So rowing back on with the GT4 guys. So on this roll bar, a lot of the, in fact virtually all of the nuts and bolts throughout the car are usually 13, 17, 19mm spanner size. So we don't need a particularly large amount of tools to get on with this. This roll bar is very accessible. In fact, you don't even really need the car jacked up to get at it. It's very accessible, but that's the other reason why we're going to go as far as having it powder coated, making it look all nice as well, because it's very visible. It's very visible at the rear of the car. You can see it as you pull up behind the car, so we want this looking as nice as possible. One weird thing that I did notice when I was taking it off, it does appear that somebody has changed one roll bar bush in the past, which is a little bit odd, with one looking quite new and one sort of very old, blatantly one of the originals. So yeah, a little bit odd, but nevertheless we will be changing both, and we will even be changing the roll bar bush brackets as well on this, trying to get them look as shiny and as new and as good as possible. There we go. So as you can see, we've got the roll bar off, we've got the exhaust off, and we've got that rear manifold off now as well. So looking down there, you can see plenty of room. So rear suspension, I'm going to start off with top shock, top wishbone and the shock. Once that's out of the way, it should allow everything to drop down. We'll get a bit more movement in everything and start ripping those wishbones out. So rowing in there with that top wishbone. Now one thing I will recommend that I didn't do in this video is I would recommend slackening all the bolts off while everything is still pretty solid, as unfortunately I didn't do that, and you can sort of see in the later stages things start flapping around because you've taken certain bits off a bit too quickly. So just a little note to add in there. Obviously if you're doing this yourself at home, it is always recommended just to get all those bolts a little bit slack before you start taking things out of the way. Another thing to note, which is definitely worth mentioning, is that once you get a hammer involved trying to get some of those bolts moving, trying to get them out of the yokes in the chassis, etc., is if you are going to hammer the end of the bolt, just put the nut back on a couple of turns, couple of threads, because I have had it before where you try and knock the bolt out without doing stuff like that, and it tends to mushroom the head of the bolt. So you either struggle getting the bolt out in its entirety, or when it comes time to put that bolt back in, you find that the nut won't quite go on properly, or it sort of damages the first couple of threads. So definitely worth noting. Obviously if you're going about this again yourself, then anytime you get the hammer involved, just make sure those threads are protected. And always a good thing to make sure you take plenty of notes about which way the bolts come in and out from, as they are a specific set way when everything's done properly. So on the upper wishbone, on the inners, they go from in to out. Obviously on the upright section, they go from front to back. one wishbone out. Now I'm going to jump onto the top, get that top shock bolt, get that slackened off before dropping the bottom one out. And the shocks can be a little bit tricky on the GT4s, as just behind this inner wheel arch panel there isn't much room to work, so it's a bit of a fiddle actually getting at the top shock bolt. So once we've got that top slackened off, back down to the bottom, get its bottom shock bolt off. So rowing in with that shock absorber, one thing to note on this particular part is that the bolts have a particularly shallow head for you to get a spanner or a ratchet on top of. So you'll probably see me sort of slip a couple of times, but it's definitely important to note to make sure, obviously a single hex socket or a single hex spanner will be the best way to go, but just make sure that you've got a spanner or ratchet socket well seated on there, as with them being a very shallow thing, it's very easy to slip off. And of course, as most mechanics know, it comes keen on the knuckles when you end up slipping off one of the bolts. Now I did mention before as well that the top bolt on the shock absorbers on GT4s can be a little bit of a fiddle to get at, as the unlike the GTBs, the wheel arch liner is only on the front section by the fuel tank, and the rest of what's blocked off as part of the arch is actually part of the body. So getting up to that top bolt on the shock can be a little bit of a fiddle. It's very tight working, so you usually end up having to use a good length extension on a ratchet just to try and get in there to get that bolt out. It can be a little bit tricky. Nevertheless, we are almost there with this shock. As you can see, we've got that bottom bolt out, we've got a good amount of movement, so it is just getting at that fiddly top bolt, giving it a bit of a tap, getting that loose, and we should just about have the shock in our hands in a moment. And there we go, one shock absorber. So next, onto the bottom, I'm going to set that off, and for now leave everything hanging on this drive shaft. So onto that bottom wishbone, and a couple of things to add is that obviously the way I'm doing this at the moment, I'm doing it in a bit of a butcher's way, just to get it done, but I would always recommend getting another axle stand and just using it to support the disc, just so you're not pulling and dragging too much on that drive shaft and the brake line. Obviously, with the amount of work I'm going to be doing on this car anyway, I'm really not fussed about damaging anything, because in essence it gives me another excuse to go a little bit further and do a little bit more with everything else on the car, and try and get it restored that little bit further. Obviously as well, you can see at the moment I'm probably struggling a little bit against where I currently have the axle stand holding up the car. Now I am used to doing this in the past, obviously on a ramp, which is a lot easier as you don't have axle stands or anything like that anywhere near where you're working. So I would probably just add to anybody trying to do this themselves, trying to do this at home in the garage, it's probably a good idea to move the axle stands forward. There's plenty of room on that chassis to pick another spot for that axle stand to go, but it's definitely worth mentioning if you are doing this yourself. Just give yourself as much room as possible. Obviously doing all this work inside the wheel arch is tight enough as it is, so definitely at any opportunity you have, if you can give yourself a little bit more room to work, it is always going to be of benefit. It is always going to make things that little bit easier for you, so definitely give yourself as much room as possible. Second wishbone out. So while that's resting there in the drive shaft, we know it's not pulling too much on the brake line, so we're going to get a couple of straps, strap it up so it's safely out of the way. Now obviously you see me dart away and quickly run and fetch that strap. I'm definitely going to recommend, again, if you're doing this yourself, keep a strap nearby. Don't be like me. Don't have to quickly run and find one when you suddenly realise, yeah, it's definitely going to be pulling on the brake line. So definitely worth keeping something like that nearby. Although, as I said before, I'd probably recommend, if you're going to do this yourself, keeping an axle stand to support the disc, or even getting some workshop struts to put in place of the shock absorber, just to hold everything in place and make everything a bit easier for you. There we go. So there we go, we've got all the wishbones off, those shock absorbers off, storing them in the boot of the car for now until we're ready to start rowing in, getting those bushes out and getting these shocks stripped down, ready for reconditioning. So that is it for today's video, guys. We've got all that rear suspension stripped down, those shock absorbers, those wishbones off, the roll bar off. So hopefully in the next video we'll start stripping some of those bushes out and getting them ready for simulated powder coating. Obviously, if you enjoyed the video, please drop a like on it, please subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you all on the next one.